Okay. So what we're going to do this evening, and please forgive me that I keep looking off to the right because I'm still looking for people to be admitted. Well, this week's Parsha, of course, is Vayishlach, and I mean, so much stuff happens in this week's Parsha that it is just, you just have to pick one story and just go with it. So the story that I chose, it really just begins in our Parsha, and as you're going to see in a few minutes, get picked up later in Breshit, at the end of Breshit, and again in Sefer Yirmiyahu, and it's very famous. And okay, so hopefully, we'll bring some sense to this very, number one, interesting, but number two, very, very, very sad, but ultimately inspiring situation. So, I mean, there were just so many pictures you can have of Kever Rachel. So I just picked this one. And if you get to go there now, you can't see this anymore because they built this fortress around it. But I lived in Efrat from 1983 until 2001. And until 1996, we went by the Kever Rachel, on our way in and out of Yerushalayim, until they built the Kvish HaMinarot, the tunnel road, to go to the Gush. We went literally right through the middle of Beit Lechem, and there, right on the side of the road, was Kever Rachel, and we would stop there just to daven mincha. If you would just look for a minyan, or if you even didn't have a minyan, it was just a wonderful thing to have it. I'm embarrassed to say that I very rarely go there anymore, but I used to be a regular at the at Kever Rachel, and it was that this is the way it looked, except that they had built a fence around it and it got extended a little bit. But basically, this is the way it's looked, at least for a couple of hundred years, right on the side of the road, and there was nothing around it until the middle of the 20th century, when the city of Beit Lechem got extended. It was mamish on the road. And what road is that where Kever Rachel is? That today we call Route 60. Happens to go by my house, right out there. And we call it Derech Hebron. But in those days, it was called Derech Hahar, the mountain route. And later it was called Derech, after the period in which we're discussing, it became called Derech Avot, the road of the patriarchs, and that name came into Latin. The Romans called it Via Patriarchus, the road of the patriarchs, and that road basically, historically, began in Beersheba, went through Hebron, went through Beit Lechem, went through Yerushalayim, went through Beit El, went by all the way up to Shechem. Today, what we call Kvish Shishim, Route 60, starts in Beersheba and goes through all those towns I just mentioned. They keep changing the route and updating it, but as of now, it still goes by our house here, Derech Hebron, and by the old city, and then up into the Shomron. But today, that Route 60 goes all the way to Nazareth, to Nazareth, even though the original route only went as far as Shechem, and then you had to go in other directions. So we've maintained that Route 60, even though it doesn't go by Kever Rachel anymore. Now it goes through the Minarot, goes the tunnels, goes by Gush Etzion, and then by next to Hebron, and it goes all the way down to and ends in Beersheba. So they were on this road. Yaakov Avinu has just come into Eretz Yisrael, and he's just first meeting his brother, and we have that that tremendous story, and of course the wrestling match with the Malach, or the mysterious stranger, and then comes the story of Shechem, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to Yaakov Avinu and re-establishes the covenant with him, and tells him that the land is going to go to his children, and that he is the heir to the brit that was given initially to Avram, and then to Yitzchak, and now to him. And almost immediately after that incident, we have our pasuk, and it says, so Rachel died. She started to give birth, of course, to Binyamin, and it was a difficult leidah, difficult birthing, and she passed away. Until the beginning of the 20th century, the single most common cause of death amongst women was childbirth. It was just a sad reality of humanity until the 20th century, when gynecology got going, and Baruch Hashem, it's not nearly as dangerous as it historically was. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the road to Ephrat, which is Beit Lechem. And Yaakov Avinu, erected a monument. Now that's not what the pasuk says. The pasuk doesn't use the word monument. The pasuk says, "V'tikaver b'derech Ephrata hi Beit Lechem v'yatzev Yaakov matzeva," and he set up a what we call a matzeva. He set up a tombstone. Now here we wrote, it's written. I got to be honest. I think this I'm not sure his translation I stole offline. I think this is Chabad. I was just taking a translation offline. The JPS in front of me refers to it as a pillar. Matzeva comes the word nitzav, to stand. So it meant a standing column of some sort, but we use that word today in modern Hebrew and Yiddish. A matzeva means a tombstone, but he sets up something over the tomb of his beloved wife, and that is the matzeva, the tombstone of Rachel, until this very day. And that's our pasuk. That somehow there is a marker over the grave of Rachel until this day. Okay, so go now to the first of the commentaries, who is the Ha'emek Davar. And the Ha'emek Davar, of course, is the Netziv, and we've talked about him before, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, and he's the father of Mayor Berlin, who changed his name to Bar Ilan. Okay, so Reb Meir Bar Ilan University is named for his son. And so his comment, he was the last Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, the famous yeshiva in Volozhin. And it says, V'tika va b'derech Ephrata. And then he says, below, Hevia afilu Beit Lechem. He was right outside. He was in an area called Ephrat. We don't know what that means. Some people think it's related to the word Pirya, fruitful, fertile area. So he's in a place called Ephrat, and he didn't even bring her into the town of Beit Lechem. Why not? Mishum she'efshar lashot kavura chaya b'shum ofim. Because there's and he quotes a Gemara that you're not supposed to delay the burial of a woman who has died in childbirth. You've got to take care of the burial as quickly as possible. So there are many reasons given why you have to take care of that as quickly as possible. Number one, we're supposed to bury people as quickly as possible. That was the minhag, and still is here in Eretz Israel, and that we do bury as quickly as possible. But the concern was that you had to start focusing on the baby. So in other words, you had to take care of X so that you could focus on Y, which in this case was the baby. Okay, so then it says at the end of this, he quotes the Gemara in Baba Kama, and then he says, at the end of the second line, but Ayin Lahalon. But you know, if you really want to know what's going on here, you have to check out later on in chapter 48, verse 7. And you're going to understand why she was buried here. So I'm going to tell you, but I'm not going to tell you now. I'm going to tell you then. Because, number one, even though the Gemara, which was written, 1,500 years, 1,700 years after this story says, oh, you're supposed to bury someone who dies, especially a childbearing mother, as quickly as possible. But I mean, that doesn't affect the story. So why was it so important that she get buried right there? He said, I can't tell you. You're gonna have to wait. Okay, so we're not gonna have to wait. We're gonna read it right now. So go back up above, the second English paragraph. And again, Yaakov Avinu is speaking. And in this case, he's speaking specifically to Yosef, to his beloved son, Yosef. And he says, Bani b'boi mi Padan. And I was on, I'm reading from the JPS, but you have it in the translation in front of you. And I was on my way from Padan Aram. And Padan Aram, of course, Padan, that's where Laban lived. So it's interesting. He doesn't mention that he thought to meet his brother. He doesn't mention the story in Shem. He doesn't mention any of those other things, including the fact that Kadosh Baruch Hu, he says this right after Kadosh Baruch Hu has renewed the covenant with him. I'm going to ask. I'm going to mute all. I can now mute all. Okay, did I mute myself? No. Okay. Sorry, I don't know who I just muted, but I apologize. So what happens is, it says meta alive. We're going to return to this phrase. The English in front of us says, Rachel died to me. Okay. And what my translation says, died to my sorrow. When she died, it was my tragedy. She died, but this was on me. She died to my sorrow. And one of the reasons he's saying this to his son at the end of his life, before he's going to bless Yosef's children, we're going to see a couple of interpretations in just a minute. But I can't help but think that the reason he's telling this to Yosef more than any other reason is he never stopped loving Rachel. Yaakov and Rachel is the Jewish version of Romeo and Juliet. This is our great love story. There are other great love stories. Shir Shirim is about love. And there are other stories that we talk about. David loved Bathsheba. I mean, we could talk about other, but there is no love story in our tradition like Yaakov and Rachel. And that's what he's saying. But she died to me. She died. It was on me. I'm the one who has gone without her. I'm the one who has missed her all these years. In the land of Canaan, on the way, Aladerah, when there was still a stretch of land to come to Ephrat. I was on my way to this place called Ephrat. And again, we don't know where Ephrat is, but okay, it may be someplace near where the modern Ephrat is, or it may not. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrat, which is Beit Lechem, which is Bethlehem. And so that's what he says. Now we're going to go back to the Emek Davar. Emek Davar is now going to talk about the reason she was buried there. Then he goes, Harishonim zal perishu shabbat lehid natzel al kvura. So many of the commentaries, we're going to mention a couple of them later, say, you know why he's saying this to Yosef before he died? He wasn't telling Yosef how much he loved his mother. He was apologizing to Yosef. Why was he apologizing to Yosef? Concerning the burial, because she doesn't get buried. We're going to talk more about this in a minute. She doesn't get buried in Marat HaMachpelah. If he loved her so much, why isn't she buried next to him? And this is like a question that comes up, especially with someone who has more than one wife. So who gets buried next to him? You'd think it is the beloved wife. So he's apologizing that she's buried here is a very, very common opinion. But the Emek Dava disagrees. No, that's a wonder. I don't get that. Shim Kain, he should have, if he was apologizing, he shouldn't have done it now. He should have done it after the brachot. Right now, he's giving him a gift. He's going to make his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, he's going to make them into tribes. They're going to become 2 of the 12 tribes. So he's giving a very special honor and gift to Yosef, that Yosef is becoming the Bechor with the double portion, 2 tribes in place of 1. And really, if he was apologizing, the apology should have come after the brachot, because after the brachot, in chapter 50, he calls Yosef over and says, "By the way, I'm going to die very soon. You have to promise me right now. Promise me that you're going to bury me in Marat HaMachpelah in Hebron." And that's, if he was going to apologize, that's when it should have given the apology. Okay? And then he goes on to say it was because he couldn't wait. But I want to skip down a little bit. He gives a long piece here about how important it is to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And maybe I shouldn't skip it because it's like part of owning Eretz Yisrael is having cemeteries here. In other words, our achuzah, our connection and hold on the land is bound up with the fact that our ancestors are buried here. And sometimes people make a very mystical thing out of visiting Kivrei Avot. There are a number of times when I was going through difficulties in my life and I went to Marat HaMachpelah, and it was always very, very moving. And I always used to daven, and there are 3 different sections there. Now it's hard to go to Yitzchak and Rivka because generally speaking, that's the Arab section. But you can go to Avram and Sarah, but I used to always go to Yaakov and Leah because those are my parents' names. So that's why when I had to, I wanted to daven and something was on my mind, especially when I lived in Efrat, I would hop on the bus and go there. Since I've come back, I haven't gone there so much. I'm a little embarrassed to say that. I should go there more. But it's very special. And people make special trips all over to visit Kivrei Avot, and that's part of our achizah. That's part of our hold on the land, and that's part of the point that the Netziv is making. But I would like to skip to the bottom of the page, and it says, no, I actually want to go to the next page. I want to go to the next page, and I want to do the next piece in the Emek Dava, where he again quotes the pasuk, "Vani bevoi mi Padan," and I was on my way from Padan Aram. And then he says, look at Rashi and look at the Rosh Rabbeinu Asher. Rabbeinu Asher, one of the latest generation of Rishonim, Ta'an alav she'ein kan makom le'inyan zeh. That he shouldn't have mentioned this now. Okay, v'yoter, and more than that, hayalo lamad devarim ela be'et shalom imenu hakvura be'eretz Canaan. And he's repeating himself. He really should have brought this up after the brachot, the brachot to Ephraim and Manasseh, and then the brachot to the other 12, all the siblings of Yosef and his siblings. And you shouldn't say it now, we should say it later. So why does he have to say it now? Lochein perish, shadavar nogeim be'inyan hanachala. So I want to tell you that the reason why it was so important to tell him about this now had something to do with the nachala. Nachala means the possessions, the apportionment of the land to the 12 brothers, but it's going to be 13 because, well, Levi doesn't get one, but 2 of the portions are going to go to Ephraim and Manasseh. Shemimeno siyem devarav, that right after this, he finishes up his talk with Yosef and then the other brothers with the blessings and gives everybody this bracha that they're going to have their own portion. So Amalo kishemeta Rachel lo holchata likivra b'makom acher. He didn't take her anyplace else. Why? Lefi shemeta bein chelek Binyamin ubein chelek Ephraim. And he's now bringing up a totally different idea from anything that we've talked about before. He's going to start talking about the different portions and brachot of the different tribes. She died in a spot which was right between the portions that were going to go to Ephraim, and Ephraim becomes the major heir of Yosef. Ephraim, not Manasseh, becomes the leadership of the northern kingdom, which was the Yosef clan. And so the portion, that the place where she died is right between where Ephraim begins and Binyamin ends. And so her dying right there is in and of itself bashert. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is foreshadowing the fact that the nachalot of the children of Rachel are going to be in that territory north of Yerushalayim, in what we call the Shomron, and she's buried right where Ephraim borders onto Binyamin. Okay, so it has to do with that. Here's the problem, and we're going to talk more about this in just a minute. That's not where Kever Rachel is. Kever Rachel, which is right down the street here, about a mile, is in Yehuda, and so he's saying that that's not where she's buried, which is fascinating, and we'll come back to that in just about 5 minutes. We're going to come right back to that. So he's saying it's very important that she dies there. Now, I just want to stop here for a second. That's not what we had originally said. Originally, we were saying that she died very quickly upon coming into Eretz Yisrael. And the Ramban feels, Nachmanides feels, that she had to die when Yaakov comes into Eretz Yisrael. It's important that Rachel dies very quickly, because according to the Ramban, the Avot, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, kept Taryag mitzvot. They kept the 613 mitzvot, one of which is you can't marry 2 sisters. But the Ramban believes that they only had to keep Taryag mitzvot in Eretz Yisrael. So immediately upon Yaakov becoming a citizen again of Eretz Yisrael, he's now in Eretz Yisrael, he got the promise of possessing Eretz Yisrael. He now has to keep Taryag mitzvot, which means it's asur for him to be married to 2 sisters. So the Ramban says that's why she had to die, so that he only would be married to Leah and not to Rachel, because Leah was the first. So the one over which the Isur would have happened, would have been Chal, has to pass away. A very, very difficult position. Okay, but I just wanted to mention that. So she dies, basically their first major stop after the reestablishing Yaakov as a citizen of Eretz Yisrael. That's not what the Emek Davar is saying. The Netziv, the Emek Davar is saying, no, she had to die there because it's between the two portions of her son Binyamin and her grandson Ephraim. Lachain, kivrata sham shedanuach al mishkava bechelek atid lipol biyad baneha. So it's very important that she is buried in that section, which is in the future going to fall into the hand of her children. The Amar, he Beit Lechem. It says it's Beit Lechem. Lahodia al pisha nikret ata Beit Lechem. Now it's called Beit Lechem. Atida likrat Efrat. But in the future, that place that's now being called Beit Lechem is in the future going to be called Efrat. Why is it going to be called Efrat? Al Shem Ephraim. Efrat doesn't have anything to do with, parat, doesn't have anything to do with fertility, fruitful. It has to do with the name Ephraim, and the name Ephraim, which means to be like a prince, to be royalty. V'stam Beit Lechem hi bechelek Ephraim, and the normal Beit Lechem is in Ephraim. Umashu bechelek Yehuda, and what about the Beit Lechem in Yehuda, right down the street from us here, where we have Kever Rachel, Nikret Beit Lechem Yehuda. That was historically referred to as Beit Lechem Yehuda. And the truth is, we know of three Beit Lechems. There's Beit Lechem Yehuda, there's Beit Lechem Ephraim, and there's Beit Lechem HaGalil, way, way up in the north. There's a third Beit Lechem. And apparently all of them were very fruitful areas where a lot of bread was baked. There were areas that had wheat fields, and people came there to do the baking and the production of bread. There may have been more places that had this. Now, this is a tremendous argument. The argument actually goes back to the Midrash in the time of Chazal, whether or not it was Beit Lechem Yehuda, which is the Beit Lechem of David HaMelech, which is the Beit Lechem that many people wanted to be that place because it's connecting Ephraim, Yosef to David. So they wanted the northern tribes to sort of be connected to David HaMelech, the King David, and Yehuda. But other people say no, and including the Ramban, Nachmanides is very strong in the fact that no. They never got nearly that far south when she died. She died much further north when they were first coming into the country. But what do we? One person is waiting. Okay. What do we do? What do we do about what do we do about the fact that they say that there's still a memorial over that spot? And here we have a memorial. Where would it be? Up in Binyamin / Ephraim. So there actually is a place that the Arabs called Kivrei B'nai Yisrael, the graves, the tombs of the children of Israel, and it's at the end of Vadi Kelt. Now, Vadi Kelt in Hebrew is called Nachal Prat, and it's north of Yerushalayim in Binyamin, and there are these massive piles of stone, and there are a lot of historians that believe that this just north of Yerushalayim, like I said, in Binyamin, is where this story took place, and the name Efrat came from Nachal Prat, and Nachal Prat, which we now call Vadi Kelt, was a very fruitful area, and it was also called Efrat. Don't know. That's that's like a story for another time that we're not so interested in. But I just want to take a quick look at this comment underneath the sort of the third paragraph on the back of the page, where it has the English word hesa and viraj. And so this is from Shadal. So Shadal is quoting two other biblical scholars, and he says, Shakavana ani osezeh, that the intention of what was going on here with the burial there, ba'avur ahavat Rachel imecha. So what he's telling, the reason, I think this is very important, the reason that Yosef is telling, Yaakov is telling this to Yosef before he blesses his sons, is to let him know how much he loved her. And he wanted Yosef to know before he passed away that the love of his life was his mother, was Rachel. And I think that's a very, very beautiful idea. But why does he mention where he buried her? Nira li. It bothered me a lot. I'm not apologizing, like the other Rishonim said, that these 19th century scholars said that he's letting him know how much it pained him to do this. And I can't even ask you to bury me next to her. In spite of the fact that I love her so much, I have a greater debt than my love for Rachel. And my greater debt is to Avram and Yitzchak, to my place in the patriarchal dynasty. And that means I have to be in Martha Machpelah. It's not where I want to be. I want to be next to Rachel, but I can't, because there is another responsibility that I have to fulfill in my burial. Al avati ota amarti kishnei bonecha yihu nechshavim kishnei shvatim, and I'm part of my testimony to my love for Rachel is that you're going to get two tribes, because you're her oldest son, and I'm making you my bechor. This is against later Jewish law, which is a question on the Ramban. I don't want to. The Ramban says they were really keeping Taryag mitzvot in Eretz Yisrael. The double portion had to go to Reuven. You can't give it to a later son just because you love his mother more. However, he did it, and it's a question on the Ramban. So that's what's going on. She's buried there because this has to do with where she belongs based upon what's going to happen to her children. And what about down here? That's a historical anomaly. And the Kedusha of this building, like I said, a mile from where we're living here in Baka, is still very, very holy because of the millions of prayers that have been shed there. But that seems to be the incorrect historical location. Bearing all that in mind, there is a continuation of the story. And the continuation of the story takes place in what becomes the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And it's just a heart-wrenching number of psukim in chapter 31 of Yirmiyahu. And I'm back to the front page. Ko amar Hashem, so says Hashem, a voice is heard on high, lamentation, bitter weeping, a bechi tamrurim, from mar, bitter weeping. Rachel mivaka al banecha, Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children, for they are not. So says Hashem, again, Hashem, stop crying. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't take it. Please stop crying, Rachel. refrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work. There is schar lepulatech. There is a reward for you. We don't know what the work is yet. Somehow we don't know what the work is, but you're going to get rewarded. And what's the reward? And they shall come back from the land of the enemy, and there is hope for your future, said the Lord. And the children shall return to their own border. V'shavu vanim ligbulam. If I had a good voice, I would sing it for you. This is just, the most amazing, moving verses. And the Radak, please go back to the second side. Reb David Kimchi is commenting on those psukim there in Yirmiyahu, which again becomes the Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah, amongst the most famous psukim in all of Navi. And the Radak says, Ki einena, perish. Ha'am, the nation isn't anymore. V'zachar elu, and he remembers these, v'amar lehem einenu, they're no longer here. Lefi shalosh shavu, od mishegalu k'mo sheshavu Yehuda, u'binyamin migalut rishon mibavel. He's saying the children that are no more are the 10 northern tribes. That's what he's not talking about, Yehuda and Binyamin, because they came back in the time of Cyrus and of Ezra and Nehemiah, what we call Shivat Zion. The other 10 tribes didn't return yet. We don't know where they are. Where they begun. They're no longer perished. Ramah, Begiva Ramah. She was on the top of a hill. Lashmiya Hakol Lemirchak. She cried from a high location so the voice would be heard from a distance. Yesh Darash, Ki Derech Kever Rachel, Holchim Bigola. There is another story in the Midrash. That why was she on the road? Totally different reason why she's on the road. The first reason she's on the road is she had to be buried immediately. The second reason she's on the road is because they wanted to place her between the areas given to her descendants. And then the third reason is she had to be on the road. Why? Because that's where the children marched on their way out of the land into the Galut. That's when she was crying for the children. And that comes on the idea that she's crying for the children, goes back to the pasuk. This pasuk is in Jeremiah, but it goes back to the pasuk in Breshit. So the Midrash back in Breshit says, why did Yaakov Avinu bury her on the road in this place called Ephrat? Ella shetzapha Yaakov Avinu beruach hakodesh. That Yaakov Avinu saw with divine inspiration, with prophecy. She'goliota tidot la'avod derech sham. That's the path that they were going to take on their way out of Eretz Yisrael, which, by the way, again militates against her being buried near me in south of Yerushalayim, because the Galut, both the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, both Goliot went north, so that they wouldn't be going by Beit Lechem. So again, that's another proof that the geography doesn't work out so well with her being buried in Beit Lechem, Yehuda. Okay? Leficha konver sham kidei shetehei mivakeshet aleihem. So therefore, he placed her there so that on the way out of Eretz Yisrael, she would cry for them, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be willing to listen to her cry for the children. And that's why it says that a voice is heard Barama. So this is another pshat the Radak is saying. The first time he said she's crying in a high spot so that people could hear her crying. Now it's saying Rabbah, She's crying on high in heaven, in Shamayim. Her tears and her cries are going all the way to heaven. The Yonatan Tagen Apostle Cain, and this is the way Yonatan, the Targum, the translation, the Aramaic translation talks about it. Cain, Kedanin Amah Hashem Kala Barum Amah, that her voice was heard at the highest place in the universe. Kiva Amud, and like way, way, way up on top. And so that's why she's there. So we've got three reasons. There's the third one that over Jewish history has caught our imagination. And it's caught our imagination not just in the psukim that we've been talking about, but there's a famous Eicha Rabbah. Eicha Rabbah is the Midrash Rabbah, the Midrash on the book of Lamentations. And it's actually in the introduction. It's actually before the book begins. There's a lot of Agadita stories about the destruction. And one of the stories about the destruction, and it's very long. I just have the end of it. So it's a big paragraph, but this is the end of what's already been happening at great length. And what happened was that when the Beit HaMikdash was being destroyed in the time of Yirmiyahu, because according to our tradition in Chazal, Yirmiyahu wrote Eicha. That's an argument. There are 5 prakim. So some people say he only wrote 4 of them, and one of the prakim was written later. But it doesn't make any difference. We'll give him credit for the whole book, for all five chapters. And he was very distraught over the destruction. And he was begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu to stop the destruction. And during these prayers to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to stop the destruction from continuing, that it says that he started traveling around Eretz Yisrael, and he went to the graves of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, then to Moshe. And even though he didn't know where Moshe's grave was, he prayed in the general area towards Harei Moab, across the Jordan. And he goes one after another to all of these great tzaddikim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says no. Avram asked the destruction to stop, and Yitzchak and Yaakov, and then Moshe Rabbeinu. And then after HaKadosh Baruch Hu says no to everybody, says, Ba'oto Shah, now this is on the page in front of you. Ba'oto Shah, Kafza Rachel Imenu, Livnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He didn't have to go to Rachel. Rachel was in heaven seeing all this. She jumped the line. She jumps in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Amr Rabbeinu, Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe. Galui lefanecha sheyakov avdecha ahavti ahava yitera. You know that Yaakov Avinu loved me very much. Va'avad bishvili la'aba sheva shanim, and he worked 7 years to become, to get me as a wife. Uksheheshlima otan sheva shanim, higiya zman nisui lebali. And after 7 years, it was time for the marriage. Yo'atz avi lachlifani lebali b'shvil achoti. But my father had this idea to switch me for my sister. Okay. V'akasha alai hadavar ad ma'od. This bothered me very much. This was very tough on me because I loved Yaakov so much. Ki nodati li ha'etza. But I knew something else was bad. It's going to happen, that Yaakov would find out that Leah was lying, because we made up a siman. V'adati lebali u'masati lo siman sheyakir beini u'bein achoti kedei shelo yuchal avi lachalifeni. And I was trying to make a sign so that there wouldn't be a switch. However, v'la'achakech nachamti ba'atzmi v'savalti et tavati v'richamti alachoti. But you know what? I decided that I had to have chemla. I had to have mercy on my sister. My beloved sister who was suffering, and all the sisters supposed to get married first, and she, she was suffering. So I had mercy upon her, and I didn't want her to become shelo teitzei lecherpa. She shouldn't be embarrassed by this whole scenario of being placed under the chuppah in my place. Erev chalpo achotai lebali b'shvili umasarti lachoti kol hasimonim shemasarti lebali, and she had all of the secret signs that we had made up. Kedei shehei sabur shehi Rachel, so that Yaakov would think it was me. Va'ata. Now I'm skipping. There was a long piece in the middle there. Va'ata melech chai v'kayam, and now, O living King, Rachaman mipnei ma kinita la'avodat kochavim she'ein bo mash. Why are you so upset that they worship the Avodah Zarah? They destroyed the temple because of Avodah Zarah, but Avodah Zarah is nothing. Everybody knows that those idols are a joke. Why did that bother you? And now you are exiling my children, and you are killing them with a sword. And all the bad guys are doing whatever they want to them. And that moment, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was filled with compassion and said, Bishvilech Rachel ani machzer et Yisrael lemekomam. I promise that I will bring them back. Hadahu dichtiv koam Hashem kol b'ramah nishma. And these are all of our psukim that we were just reading before. So this becomes one of the most famous stories in Jewish Haggadah. It's so famous that one of the keynotes, one of the elegies, one of the sad poems that we read on Tisha B'Av tells this story of Yirmiyahu going to all these kfarot, and then Rachel jumping out, and that's what these psukim are about. But these psukim aren't just about that in Yirmiyahu. What the Radak is saying is that these psukim are already about this in the time of Yaakov Avinu, that Yaakov already knew that in Jewish history there's going to be troubles and difficulties. Nobody knew difficulties more than Yaakov Avinu. His life was very difficult. But yet he knew that Rachel would be the one that would solve all of these issues, and that she would be the one who would climb up on her tomb when the Jews were going into exile and cry for them. And it was her cry that HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't say no to. And that's what's going on. She dies here, and Yaakov is distraught, but Yaakov not only loves Rachel, he not only loves Yosef, but he loves the Jewish people. And he knows that Rachel is the one who will bring about our future redemption. And Yosef himself, we believe that there's not only a Mashiach ben David, there's also a Mashiach ben Yosef, that preceding the Davidic Messiah is going to be a Messiah from the tribe of Ephraim, who is the heir to Yosef, and he will, help pave the road to the Messianic era. Rabbi Soloveitchik was very moved by the story. I know people think of the Rav as this tremendous intellect, which of course he was, a philosopher and everything, but he was extremely emotional on a number of issues. And one of the issues he was very emotional about was the relationship between husband and wife, actually. He had a very beautiful relationship with his wife, Tanya, alaiha shalom. And when she passed away, he was moved very, very much, and it affected him for the rest of his life. And he made a comment on the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, and that's at the bottom of the page. He says, "Restrain your voice from weeping. There is hope for you. There is a difference in the word of bechi and yevava." Now, there are two famous cases of crying. There are more. There's also Hannah cried, but the two most famous cases of crying on Rosh Hashanah are Rachel, and the other is the unnamed mother of Sisera. Sisera was the general who was defeated by Deborah in the book of Shoftim, book of Judges. And the mother of Sisera used to greet him when he came back from all of his victories, and she's waiting, for him to return from his victory over the Jews. But of course, he doesn't come back. They lose, and he is killed by Yael. And she cries 100 cries. And her 100 cries is the source of blowing 100 notes on the shofar in Rosh Hashanah. But her cry is called the Yavava. And the Rav explains the difference. Even though they both have the connotation of crying, the crying mother of the pagan Sisera vainly awaits his return from battle. Her cry is described as a Yavava. And that's one of the sounds that we make on the shofar. We're not sure if it's the Trua or the Shvarim, but we're trying to recreate her crying. And it's also an instinctive animal-like howl. She's so disconsolate that she howls like a wolf at night. Animals can howl too. Non-cognitive, non-directed. It's not a thought-out cry. It's just a visceral cry from the gut. And it's very moving. It's very moving. However, Bechi is different. Bechia, to cry, livkot, reflects a specifically human response to suffering. Now that we have both. Animals only have Yavava. And, Aim Sisera has Yavava. But we also have Bechi, based on an intelligent understanding of the difficult situation. It's also an expression of directed prayer. Remember, we say this on Rosh Hashanah. The two Haftorahs that we read on Rosh Hashanah are prayers of mothers. On the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we read the prayer of Hannah to have children. On the second day, we're reading the prayer of Rachel for her children that have already been born and are now suffering. So we're supposed to be learning from these two haftarahs how to daven. That's why Chazal put them there. Nobody cries, nobody prays like a mother for her child. And so therefore, we learn from her cry, which is really a directed prayer. Rachel's Bechi reflected not only suffering, but hope and faith. She, like Yaakov, understood that they have a responsibility to their as yet unborn heirs to the Jewish tradition. They care about the unborn Jewish children. And her being buried there, Yaakov makes sure she's there on purpose because she's the only one who can be mezakeh them, who can convince HaKadosh Baruch Hu that they have the merit to come home. Now, I just want to say two last things. But I want to say one about the Haftorah. A lot of people don't realize this, but on Rosh Hashanah, one of the major themes is motherhood. In the laning, we read about Sarah giving birth to Yitzchak, and so Sarah is a major issue. And then the Haftarah is Hannah wanting children, and Rachel, of course, praying for her children. But a fascinating thing happens in the Haftarah about Rachel on the second day in Yirmiyahu. What happens is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells her, don't worry, I'm their father. Don't worry, I'm their father, and I'm going to take care of them. And then it says that she doesn't accept that. And it says, even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Yesh tikva, there's hope, don't worry, God promises, and she doesn't listen. She doesn't listen. And then what happens is, then he says to her, you know what? You gave me musar. You chastised me, and I take it. And I want you to know, isn't Ephraim my most precious child, a delightful child, that whenever I speak of him, I remember him more and more? Therefore, my innards yearn for him. So I will surely have compassion upon him. Listen to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying in the Hebrew. Cain, homu me'ai. Do you know what me'ai means? My kishkas. And then he says, Rachem arachamenen Hashem. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Rachel, don't worry, I'm their father, I'm going to take care of them. Do you know what God is saying here at the end? He's talking about his intestines and his rechem, his womb. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying at the end of this back and forth between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Rachel, I understand that you don't believe me when I tell you I'm their father, but you can believe me because I'm also telling you I'm also their mother. And then Rachel starts crying. Because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that I am, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, doesn't have gender. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is both father and mother. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also Shechina. There's a feminine side, as we know from Kabbalah. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to have rachamim, compassion, empathy, that word comes from the word rechem, which means womb. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu convinces Rachel that she should stop crying and believe and have faith that he's going to take care of this, because it's not, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not just he, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also she. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the father, but also the mother. And I think that's a very powerful way of looking at the story. And we learn all of this from this dual source of Yaakov and Rachel working together. And even though the Midrash says that the reason that Rachel had this tremendous zchut, this tremendous merit, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu listens to her over everybody else, was because of that compassion she had in her sister. Okay, nice. I think there's something greater. I think it's because the love between her and Yaakov and her children. I think that story is nice, and I'm not trying to, in any way diminish it, but to me, Yaakov, Rachel, and their relationship with Yosef and Binyamin, that's the definition of love. And it's love, ultimately, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to. Yes, it's the cry, the directed cry, the cry of hope and faith, but ultimately it's love. And I think that when we read these stories, we just have to understand how much our avot and imahot truly, truly love us, and that love continues until this very day. Okay, if anybody wants to unmute, I know I meant to stop before 8:30. If anyone has a question, bevakasha. Well, you can think about questions. I want to make two announcements. Number one, starting next week, there'll be a new, we'll send it out on the WhatsApp. There'll be a new meeting Sisma, password. But from now on, to come in, you won't be admitted. You'll have to write in a password. The password is going to be Ashkelon Shiur, S-H-I-U-R. Again, we'll put it on the WhatsApp. So it's Ashkelon with a K. Ashkelon, no caps, all lowercase. And so when you get on, you just type in, it'll ask for the password. You type in Ashkelon Shiur, and you'll get right in. You won't have to wait. That's number one. The other announcement is that we were dedicating tonight's learning to a refuah shlema for Shimon Yosef ben Esther and Sipporah bat Sarachaya, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have compassion upon them and give them a speedy and complete recovery, hopefully very, very soon. Okay. Anyone that had a question? Okay. If that's that, I will thank you all very, very much for joining this evening, and look forward to seeing you next week. Next week, we're going to be doing something for Hanukkah. I haven't decided yet what, but you'll find out on Sunday when you get the source sheet. We'll do some Hanukkah material. So everyone should have a wonderful week. And again, thank you so very, very much for joining this evening.
Thank you.
Erev Tov.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Very welcome.